Hello and welcome to this episode of You're So Cool. On the show today we have uber talented artist Mr. Craig Davison. Now this episode is brought to you by our very good friends over at Geek Music, purveyors of some of the land's finest cover music from the world of movies, television, gaming and anime. So check out what they've got to offer and please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, leave a comment or a suggestion for both Geek Music and us here at You're So Cool. We hope you enjoy the show today. So let's get on with it. Hey Craig, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Can you tell our viewers your name and your job title?
My name's Craig Davison. I'm an oil painter.
Can you name check some of the projects or pieces of work that some of our viewers may have seen or know you from?
Well, predominantly I suppose it's just some paintings I tend to do. There's a child in the foreground, say he's got an anorak on his head, and then behind him is an image of Batman. So yeah, that's more or less what I do for a living.
Let's go right back to the beginning. Can you tell us what made you want to become an artist?
Well, it was a long route that got me there. But when I left school, I'd always loved art at school, but it wasn't something I even considered as a career. So I just drifted through a lot of sort of dead end jobs, and it wasn't until I was married and we had our first child that I realised, hang on, I need to create a living for me and my family that I might actually enjoy. So that's when I first started thinking about working in art.
So had you been drawing since a young age, or was it something that you grew into?
Yeah. I always used to draw as a child, and I used to read a lot of comics, so it was a lot of sort of influence from there. But yeah, I was always doodling as a child, yeah. And then at school I really enjoyed it, but as soon as I left school it kind of dropped off for me, yeah.
Did you have any formal training or attend college or university?
I say I never went to college. I went to art college for one day and I took a look around and I thought, I'm not going to fit in. I'm not going to enjoy this. And I walked out. And I regret it now. But in a way, it's where it's led me to this day. So I'm glad I did it, really.
Were comics part of your growing up?
Yeah. I mean, I used to love comics, sort of like Wizard and Chips and stuff when I was younger, and then as I got older there was comics like Action and Battle, and then 2000 AD, and I used to just eat all that stuff up. I loved it, yeah. Because all these influences, they don't, it's not like you look for them, they're just there, they're sort of part of your DNA. And as I got older I was really inspired by an illustrator called N.C. Wythe, and some of his illustration work from the sort of early part of the 20th century is absolutely phenomenal. And so I nicked a lot of what I liked about his stuff, like the colour palettes and stuff. That's what I started off with, and I always go back to him whenever I'm in trouble with a painting. I always look at his work, and it sort of grounds me, and I find solutions through him. Yeah.
So, were you a Marvel or a DC kid?
Neither really. I preferred Marvel because I remember the English reprints of the American Marvel comics, and so I kind of knew the very early Marvel, like the Jack Kirby Hulk and things, and I used to love that. But I've never been particularly inspired by superheroes, and so when 2000 AD came out, that was kind of like really refreshing because it was sort of science fiction, but without the sort of people in capes, essentially.
So what was it about 2000 AD that stood out from the US invasion of Marvel and DC for you?
It was just literally you could relate to it a lot more. Obviously, just the backgrounds. It was a lot more British, for want of a better word, and the artwork was different, a lot more stylized. So and that's what I loved about 2000 AD. There wasn't a sort of a style across the whole comic. Each story had a totally different artist and a totally different outlook. So yeah, a lot of influence from there.
Did the Shoe People lead to other comic book work?
No, no, it was a sort of one-off event, as it were. So I used to work there, and I ended up, as well as illustrating, well, as a team. There's about a team of 5 or 6 at the most, and we were left pretty much to our own devices. And so we used to write stories, do everything. I mean, I even ended up sort of writing whole comics and stuff with no training, lettering, the whole sort of gamut of things that I learned, and it was great. It forged my sort of ethic there because I'd just been doodling before that, and as soon as I got a job there, my first professional job, it was every day, and it was a big culture shock to begin with, but that stayed with me. The fact that it's not a case of I'll wait for inspiration. You've got to work.
So after redundancy, you sidestepped into working on video games, particularly with Sega Mega Drive and PlayStation. Can you mention some of the titles that you actually worked on?
Well, probably all forgotten now, but I worked on a game called Hurricanes for the Mega Drive, and then I actually came up with a game called Johnny Bazooka Tone, and that got developed, and that was one of the first PlayStation games.
So was the process of transitioning from cartoonist to video game graphics a natural one, or was there a bit of a learning curve?
Oh no, a huge learning curve because I didn't know what a computer was basically. When I first went there, my first day, I assumed the monitor was the computer. So that's how little I knew. I'd blagged my way into that anyway because I'd said I was an animator at that time, which I wasn't. But I managed to convince them I did because I used to, at Shoe People, I used to work on animation cells. So I'd done a few cells giving the impression that, yeah, I'm an animator, got the job, and then had to learn how to become an animator as well. But the company I worked for went under and I got made redundant. And I had the opportunity to work in games again, but by that time, it was a lot more 3D and a lot more computer work because up until then, it was all pixel animation, and I was happy with that. I could cope with that. But beyond that, I wasn't comfortable on computers. And so in the meantime, people creating the 3D images of characters were asking me, oh, can you do a little plasticine model? And so I'd started modelling and created, a vast array of sort of characters for people to use. And so once I left there, I pursued that side of it and I became a freelance sculptor.
So, once again, you transitioned into sculpting with very little experience but a natural talent. Can you tell us about some of the projects that you worked on? And once again, was it a natural progression?
Well, once I left once I was made redundant from the computer industry, I ended up going down the route of the 3D modelling, sculpting. So it was another big culture shock because I was working from home. You know what I mean? Up until then, I'd worked in big teams, and then I was at home in charge of myself and my own discipline. And so again, that was a learning curve in itself. Well, a lot of the work that I did was for giftware industry. So there was things like Tatty Teddy, Enchantica Dragons, Piggin, just anything you saw in a gift shop window. At some point, I sculpted them. And then also I went into sort of action figures and I worked on things like Harry Potter and Doctor Who for a time as well. I'd always sort of messed about with plasticine as a kid, but when I first started sculpting in the computer game industry as reference models for the computer animators in 3D, I found I had an affinity for it and I enjoyed it more to the point. So when I got made redundant, it seemed logical rather than going to the gaming industry, which at that time I didn't want to do anymore. I went down the route of being self-employed and sculpting, and again there was a big learning curve, as in I'd just been sculpting for reference models, but now I was creating for actual products. So it was a big learning curve, but I got there.
Now, after what seemed a continued battle against redundancy, you gave it all up. Can you talk to us about that?
The range I was working on became so successful that I literally couldn't keep up. I was sculpting maybe 2 or 3 a week, couldn't keep up, and then that process went to China. So effectively, I'd made myself redundant from my own job, and then the company that I was working for, that went under. So again, I was left in the wilderness, and I'd had enough of art. And so I literally threw all my sort of sketches, all my sculptures in a skip, because we were doing up a house at the time, threw it all away, said, no, that's the end of it. And I became a painter and decorator for a while. And so I did that, and I can't say I enjoyed it. It was, yeah, I didn't enjoy it. Let's keep it like that, yeah.
So what drew you back towards art?
Simply the fact that I was earning a living painting and decorating, but there was an itch inside of me that I had to create, and so I started sort of drawing again, but simply for me, and then from that I started painting, and that led ultimately into me becoming a full-time artist.
Would you say that this was your big break moment?
I would say it was one major sort of change, and what happened was we're moving. I lived in North Wales at the time, and we're moving to the northeast. And at the time, on the local Look North program, they were having a competition where an artist, Alexander Miller, was looking for an apprentice to train up and then go and release his own prints and be signed up by a publisher. And so I thought, hang on, I'll have a go at this. So I did a painting, drove up to Newcastle, and I was just hoping to get feedback at that time and just see if it was possible. But I got through to the final three, which was a bit of a sort of blow, because they said, oh yeah, can you come back for the next stage and bring some more paintings? I said, well, not really, because I've literally just painted this yesterday and the paint was still wet, really. And so from that point, it gave me a lot of confidence that people liked what I did, but it was a while until I'd got enough work together that I felt that I could show people again.
So how long was it before you were approached by galleries to house and sell your work?
As soon as I got maybe 10 paintings together, I started going around local galleries, and originally I started at a place called Pebbles in Allendale, a small little art cafe, and the deal was there that you could put work in, but you sat in the shop and took orders. So that's what I did. I used to sit behind the till one day a week and have my paintings in there, and luckily for me, they were selling, and that was another huge breakthrough, because as much as I was painting and enjoying it, the fact that somebody's willing to pay money for what I did was a big thing for me. And so that's where it began, and then I approached more galleries, and the next one I approached was a place called Gallerina in Darlington, and I took my paintings in there, and again they loved them, and I thought that's a step forward in itself. And then they started selling, and then people were asking for commissions, and that's when my career really started as an artist.
So let's talk more about the craft. Now, obviously, your most popular work is your Shadow series. Can you talk about the inspiration behind the concept of those pieces?
Well, that goes right back to the contest that I entered to be Alexander Miller's apprentice. And so I knew I wanted to paint. I'd had no idea what I was going to paint. So at the time, my youngest lad, he was about 10, and I watched him outside, and he was crawling about and just playing, essentially. And it just reminded me of my own childhood. And I used to imagine I was a Native American, an Apache or Cherokee, whatever. And so I created a painting. It was a little boy in a field, in a cornfield, with his bike behind him, and he was just stood there holding a stick with a feather in his hair, big blue sky behind him. And that's the painting I took, and that's what I got a lot of feedback about. And I realised I thought I was painting my memories, but I realised I'd tapped into lots of people's memories, and just the joy and the openness of childhood. You know, your whole life in front of you. You can be at whatever you can. And so from there, I kind of distilled the image down and stripped out the background, because I realised that it needed to be a clean slate, because not everybody's experience is the same. It needs to concentrate on the child. So I did the child on a bike and then put a normal shadow behind him. And then I thought, hang on, if he's imagining he's a Native American, why not have the horse and the Apache behind him as a shadow? And so that is where the image was born. And it was only ever going to be one image, but I got that much sort of support for it, and people asking me, "Oh, can I paint them as a child doing something else?" And it just snowballed from there and grew. I suppose that I'm from a generation, one of the last generations, where, you know, for one thing, you went to see a film at the cinema, for instance, and then you went home. You couldn't watch a video or anything. You had to remember it, and so you played out that film yourself. And plus, nowadays, kids, they can go and see a film, and then they can buy the costume. They can go and play the video game. They don't need as much imagination. I'm not saying kids don't have it, but it's not sort of something they need as much now. It's there on a plate for them. And so, like I say, I'm from a generation that, you know, it was just different.
Now, your Star Wars-inspired Shadow series have proved massively popular and are almost your calling card pieces. Was Star Wars a big influence on you growing up?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when it came out and queuing around the block like everybody else and seeing it for the first time, but it wasn't so much that I ever played Star Wars so much, but it just didn't. That's one of the things that got me drawing. So I'd sort of draw characters from that. But yeah, never really played it, never had the toys or anything. That's what I like about the Shadow series. You don't have to explain to anybody. You know what I mean? It's there in the picture. And I love creating the children acting out the heroes on, you know, whether it's screen or from a book. But that's what I love doing. And half the joy of it is thinking, right, if you were a kid, how would you create that character from a very limited number of props or whatever? And that's the joy of it for me. When I first started painting them, I didn't understand, but now I get exactly why people buy my paintings, because you come home from work, you've had a hell of a day, things have gone wrong, the car's broken down, you've got to pay the mortgage, and then you can look at one of my paintings, and even if for a split second it can take you back to a memory as a child when, like I said, everything was in front of you. There was not so many responsibilities if you were lucky. And, you know, I think that is the joy of it, you know, just to transport somebody back just for a couple of seconds and raise a smile with one of my paintings. That's what I really like about doing what I do.
Now, pop culture punctuates a huge percentage of your work. Does it in your normal life, or is it just a case of appealing to the mass market?
No, it is definitely something I do for my job, for my living. Me personally, no. It's. I mean, I get enough pop culture literally just by doing my job, but beyond that, no. I like to try and do as little as possible after that. Yeah.
Can we talk about your process? Now, childhood facial expressions with dynamic posing and composition are the backbone to much of your work. Do you think your history as a comic book artist has led the way to where you are at present with the Shadow series?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, all these influence, whether it be comic book or artists I admire or films or whatever, it all goes in, and I'm always trying to paint a very realistic painting, but what I end up producing isn't, and I suppose that's my style, and I'm always striving to be better at that. But all these influences, they get all mixed up, and that's who you are. That's how it comes out on paper or on canvas.
Going back to pop culture, Who and what influenced you growing up, and who of your peers continues to inspire you?
Comics, cartoons, films, books have always been an influence. But really, growing up, because I never considered art as a career, art wasn't something I really took in myself. But as I've got older, there's a lot of artists who I love. Whether it be comic book artists or, fine art painters. Mike Mignola, the comic book artist, I absolutely love his stuff because it's so simplistic. And then I always remember going to Newcastle, and they had an exhibition at the Baltic, and it was a artist called Yoshitomo Nara. And I'd never seen his work before, but walked in, and again, really simple, very cartoon-like paintings, but when you see them in the flesh, just breathtaking. So really love his work, and there's 1,000 illustrators I can't even think off the top of my head, as I mentioned before.
So, speaking of peers, your work seems to be surrounded in galleries with modern works of artists such as J.J. Adams and Monica Vincent, and the difference being that the two aforementioned artists work predominantly digitally and you work traditionally. So one area that you haven't strayed into is digital. Is there a reason for that?
Well, the reason I've never strayed into the digital sort of side of things is because I can't do it. That's the easy answer. Like I said, when I worked in computer games, I was fine with pixel animation. As soon as it got more complex, no. It's like having boxing gloves on, trying to create art with boxing gloves for me personally. And I have tried working on tablets and doing digital art, but I like the fact that it's a physical thing you're creating, and that's the joy of art for me personally. I love that some artists can do both, and some artists are totally digital. But for me, it's creating something that wasn't there before physically in the world, and I love the feeling of getting my hands dirty and physically doing it.
So, sticking with pencil and paintbrush for the foreseeable future.
I'd love to be able to do digital work, but I just can't be bothered.
So I presume there is a lot of research that goes in before you start a piece. So how does that begin?
It all depends with what I want to create. I mean, a lot of the time, I'll have an idea, it driving the car or whatever. It'll just come out of nowhere, and then I'll have to remember these ideas, come back, and then I'll start sketching them out. And I'd sometimes use reference, but I'm very lucky if I can find a reference that I need. So a lot of the time it is me literally sketching until it kind of comes together. Yeah. And plus, with what I do with the shadows as well, essentially it's two images. You've got the background image, and then you've got the foreground image. So it's kind of marrying those two up. So it still works as a single image, because that's the other thing that I have a problem with. I have that many ideas sometimes that it's only the ones at the top of the pile that get done, when there's others buried right down the bottom that I've forgotten about, or they get superseded by another idea, and so it's forever sort of deciding what to do. With reference to the painting behind me, The Girl and the Buffalo, that's a case in point where sort of two ideas collide, because I've been doing this little girl with a space helmet on, and she was just doing mad adventures like zooming through space or whatever, and then I wanted to paint an animal, but I thought, everybody paints animals, and then I thought, oh, hang on, what about the little girl on the buffalo? And then let's take a space helmet off, let's put a buffalo headdress on her, and it's just things like that, and sometimes, in fact a lot of the time, I like the fact that it makes no sense whatsoever, and it's like I'm painting the first page of a story that's literally never been written, so I'll leave it entirely up to whoever's looking at it to imagine what it's about, because even I don't know. The image has got to be strong enough for me, and that's where it begins and ends. And I'm not even bothered if people don't like my art. I think the important thing is that it gets noticed, and I'm happy for somebody to notice it in a shop or whatever and think, well, I don't like that, because I'd hate to think that you could just walk past it. And for me, that's what my art's about anyway. It's being noticed, and whether or not somebody likes it, that's fine. Obviously, I prefer them to like it, but that's what it's all down to: creating a strong image.
Let's talk about your technique. Do you have a process or a formula when you're starting a brand new piece?
Yeah, I always start with a sketch. Sometimes I'll be able to get it straight away, my first line. Other times it can take up to 2-3 days until I get exactly what I want. And a lot of the time I just give up on something and I'll come back to it a lot later. And then from the original sketch, I'll sort of hone that down until I'm happy with it, just the line work, and then I'll transfer it onto the canvas, and then from there I tend to just block it out in sort of sepia tones. And I always like to paint my canvas in orange, and I just like the colour orange, and I did it because I hate a white canvas, and that's how I started off. But then as I started to learn more about art, I found out that the Impressionists used to do that a lot, so that when they were painting, if they missed any tiny spots, you get the orange glow coming through, and it warms up the picture. So there we are. I knew what I was doing all the time. Yeah. So there we are. So orange canvas, and then I'll sort of block out the sort of shadows and highlights in sepias, and then I'll paint in acrylics over the top again, just to block out the colours. And then once I'm happy with that, I can move on to painting in oils. And sometimes I usually undo everything I've done before, and because that's how I work. And it's a bit annoying sometimes. I'll paint absolutely, even I'm saying I paint these brilliant portraits, but what it is, I'll paint them. There's a lot of detail in there, and then there's too much detail, and so I have to knock it all back. So I end up doing a really nice painting, and then I paint over it in glaze after glaze until like I said, the balance is there between the foreground and the background. So neither one dominates. It's always got to be about the child in the foreground, and the background is secondary, but at the same time they've got to work together. So it's always a balancing act.
Now, you've talked about working on multiple pieces at any one time. Do you find that keeps you motivated, or does it feel like an even heavier weight at times?
It kind of developed for me over time, but I've found that if I'm working on more than one thing, you tend to sort of have a better eye for it, because if you're working on just one painting constantly from start to finish, when it's finished, a lot of the time you look at it and think, oh, I wish I'd changed that, I wished I'd done that different. Whereas if you're working on different paintings all at different stages, you're having a break from each painting, and then you come back to it with fresh eyes, and you see mistakes or things you can change during that. And so I think it's good for that reason.
Now, you've stuck with a similar style for quite a while now, regardless of the subject matter, whether it's the Shadow series, Youth, Girls, and now Unruly Tunes. Is it a case of if it isn't broke, then don't fix it, or are you looking to break out of your own mould at times?
No, I'm always looking for a fresh idea, and that's the hardest part about any creative job is trying to find that fresh new thing that excites you and hopefully excites the public as well. So the cartoons that I've been doing at the moment, Unruly Tunes, that came from the film Taxi Driver, and in that Robert De Niro has a line, "One of these days I'm going to get myself organised." I can't do the accent, but anyway, I've always thought that that's something like Popeye would say, and so it's been floating around in my head for a long time. I thought, hang on, why don't I paint Popeye as Travis Bickle? And then I thought, oh, I can put all the other characters in there as well. So I did that, and then from that, I thought, actually, Fred Flintstone and make an absolutely fantastic Tony Soprano. And that's how my mind works. It leaps from one thing to the next. I've started another one where Porky Pig and Daffy Duck, there they are Walter White and Jesse Pinkman from Breaking Bad. And, you know, it's just started off a new thing for me. And I'm enjoying doing it, 'cause it's a nice break. Whether or not people like it, I don't know, but I've got to follow my path.
Craig, I would absolutely love it if you could just spend some time just showing our viewers what goes in to creating some of your paintings.
To begin with, I'll do a few quick thumbnail sketches of ideas, and then once I'm sort of fixed on a particular idea, I'll work that up into a sort of a refined sketch, and that's where I'm shaping the idea, this sketch then forms the backbone for the start of a painting. What I'll do then is transfer that sketch to simple line art, and then I can get that onto the canvas. Once I've got the sketch onto the canvas, I'll just use sort of browns and sepia tones just to build up the tonal values, sort of from the lightest to the darkest shades. And then once I'm happy with that, that becomes like the skeleton that I build on. So I'll use some thinned down sort of acrylic and just start laying on colours. So if I get it wrong, I can just wipe it off and I can start again. And this is the best bit of the process, because it's all up for grabs basically. You can do whatever you want. You can make your mistakes. You can try again. And if it all goes right at this stage, then the oil painting is way easier, because you've got this to work on, and you can wipe it off, and that's always there for you to use as sort of reference. You never get lost particularly, although it does happen quite a bit in fairness. I like using acrylics at this stage, because this is where the painting starts to come to life. The sort of vision I've got in my head suddenly becomes an actual thing, and it's nice to see that taking shape. I tend not to put too much detail when I'm working in acrylic, because I find that if you stand back from the painting, if you can read it as an image, that's all you need at that stage. It's only when you get into the oil paintings that you tend to put the detail in, because again, you've figured it all out in the acrylic painting stage. Another thing with painting in acrylic and oil is, with acrylic I tend to paint a lot quicker because it dries quicker. It just encourages you to work faster, and a lot of the time I even play faster music when I'm painting an acrylic. By the time I get to oil painting, it slows down. You take your time. At that point it's all about the detail. You've done all the sort of groundwork, so it's all about the detail and just all the finessing, so you tend to slow down a bit, and I tend to listen to slower music at that point as well. If you get everything right on the acrylic stage, then the oil painting is quite easy by comparison, because you've done all the hard work, as in you've got the sort of tonal values sorted, you've got the colours sorted, so it's just a case of taking your time and building up the colours and adding texture. Yeah, I apologise, obviously.
What advice would you have for young artists who would like to emulate your successful career?
For anybody aspiring to be an artist or creative in any field, really, I think it's always going to be the same answer. You work hard. There's no way around it, unfortunately. You can be blessed with lots of talent, or you can have a little bit of talent and work very hard. But either way, you've got to keep working at it. You've got to get better at what you do and never, ever rest on your laurels. Never expect to make a living from it. If you do, brilliant. And just practice all the time. And more importantly than anything else, enjoy what you do.
Hey Craig, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're so cool.
Thanks for the invite. Enjoyed it.
Hey guys, well, we hope you enjoyed this episode. How cool is Craig's work? In fact, let us know what you thought in the comments below. And also, don't forget to click those like, share and subscribe buttons. And we look forward to seeing you all again on the next exciting episode. Oh, and don't forget, you're so cool.